Hello and welcome to our next video within CIMA F3 Financial Strategy syllabus. This one will be about mergers and acquisitions, and it's still based on the express notes which you can download from the website www.theexpgroup.com. Now, mergers and acquisitions are an important part of the financial strategy exam. In the majority of cases, what you will need to do about them is to discuss the benefits and the bad part of mergers and acquisition process. As you can probably imagine from your own experience, many mergers or acquisition processes do not work the way they were planned. In the financial strategy paper, you will be required to have that knowledge and to be able to explain it clearly why these things might happen. So now let me just give you an indicator of a few things that may go right and wrong in the process of M&A. First of all, why do we have mergers and acquisition in general? First of all is the horizontal integration. So what do? We acquire a company in our own business. That we can do because we want to grow fast. We promised that to our shareholders that we will grow fast, and this is just not possible to do organically. Organically meaning by our own resources. So we will just acquire somebody else's business, and therefore our revenues will grow. Another reason might be to eliminate a competitor, a very important reason. You enter a new country, you can set up on your own or just buy someone else, and not only you get the market share but also get rid of a competitor. Then finally, two other reasons. You build your market position. You become stronger and bigger, especially in a consolidating industry, in an industry where there is a lot of small entities providing these products or services. You might be in a position to have to grow, and the easiest way of growing is by acquiring other market participants. Finally, that usually is just an add-on on the previous three. You promise your shareholders there will be synergies. Synergies in terms of, for example, you'll say we're going to purchase more and therefore we will get lower prices. We will need less admin staff because things will not be duplicated, and so on and so on. So there will be some synergies there. R&D, say in an automotive industry, you get this reason very often. R&D will not have to be duplicated. We will just design and develop one engine, diesel engine, instead of two types of diesel engines for our two companies. Another way of affecting mergers and acquisition is vertical integration. However, remember that it's not so common nowadays. What rules nowadays is horizontal integration, not vertical. Vertical is when you acquire someone up one notch in your value chain or down one notch in your value chain. That is when you acquire your supplier or your client. And you may want to acquire your client because you want to put your hands on their margins, or you may want to acquire your supplier because you want to gain control over your supplies or increase your bargaining power. That did happen in the past. It doesn't happen so often nowadays. How are mergers and acquisitions structured? Well, from a strategic point of view, there's a number of things you need to think about. First of all, how do you make the acquisition? Do you purchase shares or just the business of that company? right? That's the first decision to be made. Do you buy shares and therefore you buy that other company, or do you only buy assets? Both have advantages and disadvantages. If you buy a separate company, you buy an existing business with its procedures, personnel, client base, and so on. When you buy assets, you have to integrate them into your activities. Well, you usually obviously put your hands on the clients of that other entity. However, you need a fast integration. These assets are probably not capable of operating on their own. Then how will you pay for it? Will you pay cash or will you give your own shares for it? Finally, if it's cash, then where do you take it from? Maybe you will issue new shares, take a loan, or both. So strategically, that's another thing to think about. Before the crisis, the most common way of mergers and acquisition, of affecting mergers and acquisition, was a share for share swap. In this case, you had a company A and a company B that was supposed to be taken over. B had some shareholders that had 100% shares in that company, and the way the acquisition was affected was that those 100% shares went to company A, which gave, let's say, 10% shares in company A, usually newly issued shares, to the old shareholders of B. So B became owned by A, and old shareholders of B received some shares of A. And the good thing about it is A did not have to spend any cash. The bad thing is the shareholders of B lost control over B, which was probably part of the plan, but now their actual wealth is dependent on the well-being of the shares of A. The last thing to discuss within that express video is the risks of failures of mergers and acquisitions. You probably heard about successful mergers and acquisitions, but much more often you heard about things that didn't work. Just consider Daimler Chrysler in recent years, which first got married, then got separated, and then got divorced, and you could come up with many, many examples like these. What happens with mergers and acquisitions? Well, we talked about reasons for mergers and acquisitions, but you can't forget about the behavioral aspect of mergers and acquisitions. Now, the management of the acquiring company usually wants to effect that acquisition because they hope to become owners of a bigger company. And very often they will overstate the benefits and understate the costs of the acquisition. And then after the actual acquisition, the integration turns out to be more time consuming. The integration might be more time consuming because of cultural differences. That was one of the reasons for the problems between Daimler and Chrysler. Daimler was a German company, Chrysler was an American company, totally different management cultures. They couldn't really work together well. Then, in a merger and acquisition, there are always some cost synergies mentioned to the shareholders for those shareholders to agree for the merger. And these are usually overstated. You acquire a company and you quickly realize that actually the admin processes and procedures are slightly different, or you can't really get rid of the staff, the admin staff, or you don't want to get rid of, or the managers of that company you acquired don't want to get rid of that staff, and they just reassign jobs between them. So in theory, these people disappear, but then they come up in a different part of organization as somebody else. So cost synergies are not realized. And then purchasing power, the reduction in the cost of buying is not realized. That also may be the case. Why? Because actually it turns out that you buy different things. You don't really buy the same components, and therefore you cannot buy them cheaper. Because of the first three, in the majority of cases, at the end of the day, it turns out that the acquisition price was too high. Remember that the acquisition price is always based on the combined value of the entity and planned synergies. If those synergies do not work as they were planned to work, then it turns out that the price was too high. So what is the recipe for a successful merger and acquisition process? Well, first of all, what are the reasons for it? Discuss the reasons. Because if the only reason is to make the managers happier by being managers of a bigger company, it doesn't make sense. It just creates mess. Now, then draw up a short list of possible takeover targets, but take into consideration the culture. Only the culturally close entities can make a combined entity that would be successful. Otherwise, you will spend years, and that is the time-consuming element, by trying to align the corporate cultures of the two companies. Then, value the target based on publicly available information. Do not assume excessive strategies. Do not assume cost synergies that will reduce the cost base by 50%. It just does not make sense. Whatever is publicly available is the actual value of it, and you shouldn't pay more than that, assuming you will have extraordinary synergies, because in the majority of cases they just don't come true. And finally, be tight on finances, right? What are the actual options of financing that you can do, not to destroy the financial well-being of the acquiring company?